Hey, it's me. Welcome to the Paul Leslie Hour. We're joined by a writer, Danny Rubin. His specialty is screenplays, and he's had success in particular, for example, the film Groundhog Day, which he co-wrote with the late Harold Ramis, and it starred Bill Murray, Andie MacDowell, and Chris Elliott. Groundhog Day is considered one of the greatest comedy movies and was added to the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. He also co-wrote the screenplays to films like Hear No Evil, S.F.W., and for the stage, he wrote the book for a musical to Groundhog Day. Danny Rubin also wrote a book entitled How to Write Groundhog Day. He's even taught screenwriting. So, welcome to Danny Rubin.
Thanks, Paul.
Great to have you here. So, where are you in the world right now?
Well, the GPS would say I am located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is where I live.
What brought you to Santa Fe?
Oh, I was, Louise, my wife and I were looking for an exit strategy out of Los Angeles, and this was the first good idea to come along. And that was about 25 years ago. So this is where we just sort of planted roots and made our home.
A second ago, I said about Groundhog Day being named a culturally significant film. Did you ever dream that one day something you wrote would be so culturally relevant?
Well, no, I guess not. But when you're young and ambitious and it's very hard writing and it's very hard breaking into the industry too. And so you tell yourself all kinds of things. So I don't know if I ever would have predicted that I would do anything that was, would ever become part of the language and be considered culturally significant. But that was my ambition, to try and do something that was actually good.
Now, if you had never had a Groundhog Day, that is to say, you had never had a film that was that successful, do you think you would have stayed at it?
I don't know. I mean, probably as long as people were paying me to do it, it's a satisfying process. I like writing screenplays, and it's kind of fun being in the movie business. And even if it's only with one toe in it, it's still kind of fun. The success opened up a lot of other doors. So I was able to do teaching, which was a way of being part of a community and, to share what you know, that kind of thing. And it's opened opportunities for speaking places and meeting people. And so, my life is bigger than just writing screenplays. And I think having such a significant piece of work under my belt when I was younger, helped open other doors that made me feel like I was living a full life. So I don't know where things would have led otherwise. Do you?
Who would know, right? Well, why screenplays?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, for one thing, I did a lot of things when I was in my early 20s, and if anybody had decided to start paying me to write songs or play guitar or be a film editor or a bunch of other things that I was pursuing at the time, that would have been great. All of that would have been fine. I remember when I was in graduate school up at Northwestern, was keeping a journal, and I wrote down what I was really looking for professionally. And that was just to be in a creative atmosphere, working with people who were really good at what they did. That was it. I didn't really care what field it was. The other thing, screenwriting, I've always written as a way of expressing ideas. And I guess I realized that I'm not a very expansive writer. I don't like to write a lot of details about the atmosphere. I like to kind of get to the point. And I found that screenwriting is a very good medium for doing that. And I found it suited my skills and my sensibilities, and it was fun. So that's how I kind of kept up with it anyway.
You say it's fun, but is writing difficult?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, there are parts of it where it feels like you're just pushing a stone up a hill, or you're not even moving. You're just standing there pushing on the stone, looking at the hill. And it's very difficult. But there are other parts that it's more like gliding. It's just pure pleasure because the ideas are flowing and they all make sense and they all contribute to each other in a singular way. And so it's both of those things.
Who would you say taught you the most about writing?
Oh, honestly, me. I think I came at it with a lot of ignorance, and I kept just spilling it out and looking at it and trying to figure out why it wasn't better or finding things that I liked and telling myself I am amazing. I should keep doing this. It was a lot of that. And I think that there's a lot of that for every writer to really teach themselves. Outside of that, I've gotten a handful of really useful lessons here and there. I remember when I was in my 20s, I lived in Chicago and saw an awful lot of plays. And one of the plays I saw was a David Mamet play called Duck Variations. And I loved that because it taught me a great writing lesson. The whole play was a series of short scenes between two old men sitting on a park bench talking about ducks. And that was the whole play. But what the lesson I learned was that in talking about ducks, we learned everything about their philosophies and their attitudes about life and their joys and their sorrows and disappointments, and for each of them and in relation to each other by talking about ducks. And it was just a wonderful lesson in writing, that you don't have to hit something head on and just talk about what you're thinking, but you can use an uninvolved object or idea as being the thing that people talk about, and that's really their the wall that they're bouncing themselves against, so that we get to learn about them. So anyway, that's there you go. There's one lesson. But it's like that, I think. You go through life and you see things and you hear things and they have little influences and you say, "Oh, I want to try that." But it's still the writer in the room teaching himself, teaching herself. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. I wish I had a mentor. I would have loved that. I would have loved to have discovered one person who said, "I want your career," or "I want to be able to write like you. Show me what you do." But nobody writes like me. Everybody writes like them. And I never assumed that there would be somebody out there like that either. So I wasn't pursuing a mentor, but I kept my eyes open and I thought, boy, that would be great. And then I wake up and I'm an adult and I'm already doing stuff. Oh, well.
So when you're writing or you're brainstorming or whatever, and you get a crazy idea, how does Danny Rubin react to that?
Oh, well, I immediately start taking notes on it to see where it's leading. And then I get a sense of its size. What is this? Is this a joke? Is it a gag? Is it a sketch? Is it a movie? Is it a play? Is it a short story? Is it a amusing anecdote I can tell at parties? What is the use and proportion of this brilliant idea I just had? Usually I write it down and categorize it in some way, like random idea or good idea for a radio play or good premise for a movie. And usually I'll never see it again. But every now and then, some things I just remember, and they, when I need them, they come up. But my memory is actually pretty bad, and I have come to depend on just coming up with new stuff when I need it. I mean, the other day I got this idea that I thought was funny about a voodoo doll who actually reacts to it as if it's acupuncture. And I thought that there's something funny about a voodoo doll getting cured. But I don't know what to do with an idea like that. But for the first time, I had an outlet, which is my friend Robert Layton, who's a cartoonist. I said, this would be a good, the size of this idea is about right for a cartoon. I sent it to him and he played with it and came up with something. So, you know, that would be great to be able to just sort of take my brilliant ideas and throw them to the right people who can do things with them and I don't have to do anything. But what usually happens is I'm working on a project and I get to the end and then I say, okay, what's next? What's my next thing? And I look through some of these old ideas and sometimes one of them starts to take on more weight than the other ones. And that's the one that I wind up working on.
We were mentioning before we started the interview, or you were mentioning, that you come from originally Gainesville, Florida.
Yes, sir.
I'm
Go
hoping,
Gators.
I'm hoping you can tell the listeners a little bit about your background.
I was born a very small child in San Francisco, actually, where my parents
Ah,
come from. And by the time I was starting school, we had ended up in Gainesville. My father, an ophthalmologist who was helping to start an ophthalmology department at the University of Florida. So that's where I spent my 12 years of school. And I don't know. What do you want to know about me? I went to school and then I left. And I had friends. That was fine. It was the land of university. And so I was sort of like a townie hanging out at the university. By the time I was 17, 18, I'd go, my friends and I would go rush at the fraternities because, you know, there's free alcohol and everyone's friendly.
hmm,
So by the time I got to college, I was not interested in the frat experience. I felt I was done.
hmm. Well, were you a movie lover from early on?
Yeah, I think I was. I was very much a television watcher. And I had shows that I thought were better than others, and I developed opinions, and I watched with a lot of interest. I'd read the credits and try and, you know, back figure who was involved in making what shows and how they did it and all that. But a lot of movies also showed on television, and of course the movie theater. But you know, that was back then. I think there were only a couple of movie theaters in town that showed first run movies, and they ran for a pretty long time. So after you saw the movie and, you know, it was a couple months before something new would come along. That's the way it was in the 60s in Gainesville, Florida. But I loved movies and I watched a lot of old movies on television. And the summer before college, I had decided that my 4 years of high school French had been difficult and painstaking and yet I still didn't feel like I could speak French and I wasn't going to waste all that time. So I checked myself into a French immersion program for the summer. And among other things that they had there was an amazing film cinematheque. And they showed these, you know, Nouvelle Vague French films every night. And I fancied that I understood them because I understood French so well, but I think I was reading the subtitles. So I never went to film school, but I did feel that I got a pretty good education between all of the old films I watched on television and this experience that one summer of starting to be exposed to and learning to like all these films by Buñuel and, you know, all of those guys.
Well, can you tell us a few of your favorite movies of all time and why?
Well, you know, I'm not really good at that. First of all, I don't ever remember, and I'm sorry. I at one point wrote a bunch of things down so that when people asked me, I would say, "Oh yeah, I always liked that movie." Let's see. I know I wrote down Brazil. Brazil was a movie that I thought just fired on all pistons for me. It was beautiful. It was funny. It was engaging. It was political and satirical, but it was wise. I mean, there were a lot of things about it that I felt made up for what I consider to be a really good entertainment. So that I always loved Kind Hearts and Coronets, and that had a little bit of influence on Groundhog Day, actually. That's the Alec Guinness movie where he murders everybody between him and a noble appointment title. and it's all very black comedy, the way he kills everybody, and it's funny. And I don't know, the same films everyone likes. I remember the first time I saw Casablanca, first of all, I was just rolling on the floor laughing because I'd heard of it my whole life, and it was coming on television. It was the first time I was going to get to see it. I thought, I'm going to watch this. Started watching it, and it was so funny because there was a cartoon that I had watched called Secret Squirrel and Morocco Mole. And that was basically just Casablanca characters with a squirrel and a mole. It was the Sidney Greenstreet character and Peter Lorre character. Hide me, Rick, hide me. All that stuff. So it felt cartoonish to me the first time I saw it, but it was such an entertaining movie. It just worked so well on every level. I just loved it. I've seen it many times. Anyway, that's a little smattering, but you could probably name almost anything. I'd go, oh yeah, that was a great movie.
When you were writing Groundhog Day, were there any epiphanies that you had, any aha moments that you could share?
While I was writing it?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe even after.
Well, the biggest aha moment was when I got the idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first part of the idea, which I wrote back when I was living in Chicago, when I was just brainstorming stuff, was about a guy reliving the same over and over again. And for many people, that's it. That's the whole thing. But at the time, for me, I understood why it was funny, and I understood the advantage that he would have, this character. And I felt like it was an entertaining idea for a movie that I hadn't seen before. But I had a bunch of other ideas I liked just as much. The thing that made this one eventually stand out was when I was working on another idea, just sort of thinking about immortality and wondering if an Arrested Development type adolescent man couldn't outgrow himself, couldn't ever quite get past that and grow up. Maybe for some people that just wasn't enough time, one lifetime. So I started wondering as a thought experiment whether a person like that, if they lived long enough and they had enough time, maybe they would finally grow up. And I was thinking it through, and it seemed kind of cumbersome as a movie idea anytime you try and come up with eternity. But then I remembered the other idea about a guy repeating the same day, and I realized that was the biggest aha moment I've ever had, which was that you can have eternity by repeating the same day. And I got both of my movies at the same time with all the fun entertainment of a person knowing what's going to happen when nobody else does, and the weight of eternity and what that does to a human life. I knew that was a movie, and that was a movie I could really dig my teeth into.
What are your memories of Harold Ramis that you co-wrote the screenplay with?
Oh, Harold was great. I mean, Harold was, anytime I was around him, anytime I observed him, and I think most people felt this, he's just so affable. He has this relaxed, kind of joyful way of bringing the world in and processing it. And I always asked him about that. He said it's all an exterior show, and on the inside he's a mess. But I'll tell you, he hit it awfully well. When we were first working together, I mean, this was an original screenplay, and then he optioned it and then set to work with me on how to make it into a Hollywood movie, which it wasn't really. And there was both of us being excited about the project, both of us being, I don't know, just kind of nice Jewish boys, I guess you would say. We were similar types, and we were both kind of folkies and there was at least one party where we were playing guitars and singing and all the things that you might have sung in Greenwich Village in the day. Harold is a little bit older than me, maybe 10 years older than me, but we still shared that. And it was a slightly difficult working relationship in that we were both trying to make it good, but it was hard to know what to let go of and what to hang on to. And so these were interesting conversations. I think it was all respectful. In fact, there was one point in the process where all the other helpers and assistants and note takers and opinioners were out of the room, and it was just me and Harold kind of deciding which pieces we were going to work on and making final decisions before the actual production. It was just nice because he could have completely sidelined me because I was a young writer and I was trying to figure out what would work for him. And he knew what would work for him, and he could have and he's an excellent writer, and he didn't need me to be there. But I think he wanted to bring it along in a nice family way, everybody together. And we did the best we could with that. Most remarkable about Harold was, I think, later on, I mean, as the movie became more popular and part of the culture, he and I would touch base about once a year, either see each other or just talk on the phone and say, "Can you believe this?" You know? And when he actually came through Santa Fe once when he was working on Year One, his final movie, and we got to spend a whole bunch of time together, and it was just so, you know, we realized we'd known each other for quite a long time and talked about our families over the years, and it was just lovely. So even though there were subsequent conversations after that, and I tried to see him toward the end, but the timing didn't quite work out, and that was unfortunate. But my really final time with him was quite excellent and very warm.
Could you imagine anybody other than Bill Murray playing Phil Connors?
Well, now it's kind of hard because he's so associated with the movie. Now, I've had the experience of working on the musical where we were retelling the story in a different medium. And we had the guy we wound up with both for the London production and on Broadway, named Andie was not anything like Bill Murray, and yet he was wonderful. It worked like gangbusters. It's just a really fun character. We had to alter it a little bit. Bill is more, laconic, terse. He doesn't need to say a lot to get a lot across. And the style of his commentary on the rest of the world during that movie is not the kind of character who would break into song. And so we I thought about maybe it would be kind of fun to have a musical where the main guy, everybody in town is singing and having a wonderful time, and he's the only one who refuses to sing. Until, he finally starts to change over and find his voice, which would have been a lovely idea, but we all agreed that you can't have a Broadway musical where the main character doesn't sing for 3/4 of it. So instead we changed the character and made him just a little bit more snide and a little bit more extroverted and in people's face, and that was a fun character. So Andie was great. And even before we had cast Andie, we'd done a bunch of workshops, and the fills that we used for those workshops as we were learning and building the show were also quite wonderful. So, I love Bill Murray, and I think he's great in this, and I think he will always be remembered for that role. But yeah, I can imagine other people.
Like who?
Well, each person would have made it his own. One of the things that I was pushing for back in the day was they asked me who I pictured as Phil Connors, and I said a young Jimmy Stewart, who was exactly who I pictured. Harold said, "I don't think he's available." So we had to think of somebody else. And I remember saying I preferred an actor who could do comedy to a comedian who could act, and because I felt like the role required it. And so people like Tom Hanks and Kevin Kline were people whose names came up. I can't remember who else. Those were people I thought of. And they would have brought their own thing to it. And they probably would have been good, but there was something very special about Bill Murray. You cannot deny that.
When the movie was being made, were you a witness to any of that?
I was there for the first couple of weeks of pre-production and then the first week of shooting. After that, it didn't feel like I needed to be there. I had other things that I felt were pulling on me, and those guys seemed to have the whole thing in hand. It would have been fun. That would have been my first like full on, 3-month feature film commitment kind of part of the circus thing. But I had just had a baby daughter and we had just moved to Santa Fe, and I felt like I wanted to establish my values as an adult, as somebody who would choose his family over his work if that were the choice. And it just felt right to me. It was the right decision for me. So, they asked me to stay, but I said no thank you and moved on. So I only saw the first, a couple of scenes being shot. And it was cold as fuck too, I'll tell you that. I've never been colder in my life, and I've lived in a lot of cold places. There was something about that month in northern Illinois of that year that just had a certain quality of bone chillingness. So standing around outside watching them shoot was not really that entertaining.
I see.
And if you've ever been on a movie set, it's not, you have experiences and all that, but for the most part, it's watching paint dry. Nothing happens for hours.
Yeah, it's boring.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the use of Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's brother,
Yeah.
for Buster. What do you think of that?
You know what? It didn't even register on me that it was his brother until some point during the shooting, but it didn't. He was just fine for the character. He was good for the part. I didn't have any real thoughts about it. I thought it's kind of cool working with your family. I didn't feel like he was, we could have found somebody better. I spent some time with both of them in New York, it was really lovely. It's not, I'm not going to pretend like these are my best friends and we hang out all the time. But when Bill and Brian came to see the show in New York, I was sort of their host. So it was fun to be with them. And it's, they're brothers. It's fun seeing people who know each other that well.
The process of creating the musical, was that very challenging?
It was challenging, but I'll tell you, it was pure joy. Partially because I came in with a lot of apprehension about whether I was the right person to do it, because I didn't want to blow the project. I felt like this was I'm the keeper of the flame. For whatever reason, it's mine to do with as I will. And so I felt a responsibility to do a good job. And I really wanted to work on it, but I didn't want to ruin it. So at first I was apprehensive, but it didn't take long for me to realize, first of all, that I completely have the skill set. So even though I didn't have a ton of experience in writing musicals, I had a ton of experience writing scenes and writing characters and understanding music, because I've been a songwriter for many years. And it turned out to be something that I totally knew how to do. And then the other thing was my partners. Matthew Warchus is an unbelievably strong director, and Tim Minchin is an unbelievably strong writer of music and lyrics. And they're both delightful people, and we all got along. And it was instant kind of friendship. And the two of them had already established this when they worked on Matilda together, but they made me feel welcome. I was part of the party, and we were together working on this for almost 5 years. It was just wonderful. I loved it. And I liked revisiting the themes of the movie. I wanted, to very carefully give people the same experience of the movie and the musical, that sense of thinking you have it sized up and then, being delighted by some new twist that you hadn't anticipated, and for it to keep going like that. And then for it to reveal itself to have much more emotional depth than you would have thought from the beginning. So I wanted to do all that, but I also wanted to give people little bits of things from the movie specifically that they would like, but not too many of them, and surprise people with other things. They think they know what they're going to get, and it's a little bit different. And finally, to in some way touch on a lot of the themes that I've either figured out through talking to people of 20 years about the movie and getting their experiences and their stories and their relationship with the movie. A lot of themes that we wanted to bring into the play to make it an even deeper experience for the audience. So there was a lot, and we crafted it all together in a really delightful way. So very proud of the work, and I'm happy with the result too.
You mentioned a moment ago that you're a songwriter.
Mm.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, if I were any good, you probably would have heard all the songs, but it's mostly just for my pleasure and my friends and family. And I have not in any way tried to make a career out of it. I'm just trying to amuse myself. And, a movie project can take anywhere from 3 months to several years, working always on the same thing. And I have to break that up somehow. So if I get an idea for something like a little essay or a short story, or most conveniently for me, a song, I can satisfy myself to create that, in an afternoon or in a week. And then I have something else that I've made. So it's sort of part of my process and part of my joy. And I don't know, maybe someday I'll get good at it.
Do you write on the guitar?
Mostly. I play a few instruments poorly, but I play the guitar the least poorly and feel the most comfortable with it. So yeah, I'm almost always composing on the guitar.
Well, would you like to play us something?
Oh, how nice of you. No. I have a couple of quasi-produced pieces I could send you if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be curious to hear.
Right. That always sharing with my friends for their amusement. If I try to make it sound any more grandiose than that, you will certainly be disappointed, because I encounter so many people who are just brilliant musicians and composers and songwriters and singers and performers. And I'm not one of those. I'm the amateur who gets to just sort of enjoy being on the edges.
I love to hear people sing, even people who are not singers. I love music.
That's how I feel.
Yeah. Apparently Bill Murray feels that way too.
He does like to sing. I don't know how he wound up. This latest tour of his seems to delight him for sure. And I think people should do those things that delight them. Singing is a wonderful enterprise. I love to sing. I have learned not to be too embarrassed to sing in front of people.
Do you think that screenplay writers get enough respect?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, within the industry, probably not. They don't have power, really. And, most of their hard work gets credited to the people who are in front of the camera. And everybody feels like they know English and they know how to type. So why are we paying these writers to do it for us? There's this built-in kind of resentment, I think, that's people say they love writers and I'm a writer's agent. I'm a writer's producer. I love writers. It's like, well, I don't know. We're kind of a pain in the ass too, because we like things to be perfect and the way we planned them. And it's a very collaborative art, making movies, and everybody has to give and take some. And some writers are better at that than others, I guess. And some producers are better at believing in the writers, and others are more interested in just whatever is quick and easy, and they can make a movie out of it. Not even a good movie. Let's just get a movie made. So I don't know. Everybody feels like they could use more respect, right? I don't know if anyone thinks they've got too much. I think that the projects that are very original, not in style, but original in concept, those movies, the writers are recognized, I think. People do notice. And that's a good thing.
What misconceptions do you think there are about screenplay writers?
I don't know, that we all are floating in the swimming pool in Los Angeles. I don't know. What are misconceptions about screenwriters? I don't know. I don't know what they conceive of us. I don't know really what our place is exactly right now. I was busy teaching for a few years and between that and the musical, I haven't really had my head in the game. I'm just sort of returning to that now. And those things change. So I'm not really sure where the writers are now in people's imaginations.
Well, you just said hanging out in a swimming pool in L.A., and I remember at the top of the interview you were mentioning that you had left L.A. So why did you leave L.A.?
Oh, that was totally just a life choice. Yeah, there were little things that just made me feel like this was not the community I wanted to make my life in. And I didn't want my children's lives to be tied up in it. It just didn't feel like me and Louise, the life we were building together. It did not feel like an LA life. The place we looked at before we wound up moving to LA when I sold a screenplay was Missoula, Montana. These sort of small, highly cultured mountain university type towns felt right to us. And it turned out Missoula wasn't the right idea, but it turned out that Santa Fe was. So it really wasn't, I don't know. I didn't like that when you meet somebody who you really like, they could very easily live an hour and a half away. And everything was about cars and traffic. And, all these are lifestyle things. I loved being in the city where my industry was happening. It was really kind of exciting. But in the end, it just wasn't the life. I mean, when our daughter was 1, we were part of a little baby group, and I could feel that these birthday parties for the 1-year-olds were already getting competitive. Who's going to have a clown, and who's going to have a jumpy tent, and who's going to fly everybody to Barbados. I mean, I don't know, but that just didn't feel like us. And there are tons of people who are like us who managed to stick it out and live there. And we thought about it, but we also said, let's not just assume we have to be here. So yeah, we decided to move on.
Do you think that in this life it's more important to be humble or more important to be confident?
Well, I'm both in equal proportion. I'm completely convinced of my incredible worth, and I want to share it with people. And I'm completely convinced of my lack of worth and how much luck is involved in this industry. So, I don't know which is more important. You pull out whichever one you need at the time. We all try to just survive, right?
Yeah. It seems like you have a kind of relaxed approach in some respects to work.
it always kind of works out that way. There have been times when I was more intense about it, intense in my output, intense in my wanting to sell it and get it out there. But I don't know. I guess I've just developed a patience about it. And also I've had a knowledge from very early on that I don't operate as well under high anxiety as I do under more relaxed state. I'm more creative actually when I'm more relaxed, and I'm happier when I'm more relaxed. And so I decided to assume that I could pursue my life this way and it would be fine. And it has been. I could have made more money and I could have made more movies, but instead I sleep well at night. I haven't made a whole lot of huge compromises, just little ones. And it seems to suit me.
What is the best thing about being Danny Rubin?
Well, I've been totally lucky. This groundhog thing it's associated my name with that movie and that story. And so it's kind of amazing to be really a small town, humble guy and still be able to go places and people know who I am and want to talk to me. It's like, that's kind of amazing. I spent a lot of time with Bill Murray when we were first working on the movie. And one of the things I realized is how difficult it is to be as famous as he is. And that was, 25 years ago. Now he's even more legendary. And it's just difficult to be a public person. And I think I have accidentally slid into this place where I get to meet a lot of these amazing people, and people seem to have some interest in me from time to time, but not so much that it's a burden. And I get to live my life without the oppression of being a very popular person. So yeah, I feel pretty good in my own skin right now.
Well, one of the things about communication and technology today is just how quickly and how vast a message can spread. And so, for my last question, I'm going to leave it very open ended. Just give you the stage. What would you say to our audience?
Oh, I know what I'd say. I love that Groundhog Day as an expression has come into the lexicon, and people are starting to recognize and label their experiences of repetition, endless cycles that are kind of depressing and cycles that they want to get out of. So I acknowledge that that's a really cool thing, but people ought to go the next step. Phil got out of his loop and he did it. Well, I'm not even going to tell you how he did it. You go watch the movie. You figure out how he did it. But there isn't a problem, an intractable loop, I think, that people could not get out of if they just pay attention in the way that Phil winds up paying attention. I think just labeling the problem is helpful. But people shouldn't sit on their despair and say, well, it's Groundhog Day again. There are ways to get past it. I feel that very strongly.
Wow. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I've really
you ask
enjoyed.
Good questions.
Well, thank you. And for all the listeners out there, if they want some more information, it's DannyRubin.com. Danny, Rubin. DannyRubin.com. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thanks, Paul, and it's been a pleasure to talk with you too. You should come down here sometime.
Will do. I've been planning a road trip.
Well, you're welcome. Take care.
All right, till next time.